continue to dismantle the pseudo-empire of evil. And the final collapse of Russia will begin in the Caucasus. It is this region that the Russians have tried to subjugate for centuries, and for centuries they've been getting punched in their drunken noses. Dagestan should become the driving force in destroying the prison of nations, because throughout history, Dagestanis have never surrendered or recognized Moscow's authority.
From a young age, even as children, there was truly no word more especially insulting to us Dagestanis than if someone called us Russian, well, Russ.
Dagestanis are a people with a centuries-old tradition of statehood. When they were building their cities, Russian savages were still chewing on birch bark and twisting beaver's tails.
For which I am grateful.
And they put it on display in this building. I think it was the city hall. And people would come and look at it. Just imagine, for example, the customs of some African tribe. But these people seriously claim that they brought civilization.
But how could dirty, filthy Rushanu, perhaps a general or a soldier, bring civilization to Dagestan?
Derbent was founded by the Persians in the 5th century, and, in terms of age, is comparable to Kiev. That is, while the future would-be empire builders were trying to invent bast shoes in the swamps, Kiev and Dagestan were actively trading and waging wars. Sviatoslav Igorevich campaigned against Derbent in the year 965. But, following the old Russian Nazi tradition, the history of Derbent was rewritten, and they claimed it was founded under the Tsar in 1840, right after the occupation. In exactly the same way, they refounded Odessa, Sevastopol, which is over 2,000 years old, and almost every city they ever captured. The Russians actively erased all history that existed before their arrival.
Odessa, come back home. We've been waiting for Odessa to join the Russian Federation. Even considering the history of this city, the kind of people who live there, and the language they speak, this is our Russian city.
Dagestan was a civilized, cultured country, and during its first contacts with the swamps, it was Muscovy that played the role of the barbarians.
This is indeed a serviceman. He finished his service, relaxed in the urn, now he's sleeping and resting.
Diplomatic relations between Dagestan and Mordor were established in the year 1556. At that time, a peaceful embassy from the Caucasian ruler presented Ivan the Terrible with an incredible wandering elephant. I can just imagine how many times the Russians tried to baptize it, because they couldn't figure out which end was the front or the back. The fate of the animal is unknown, but perhaps the Tsar cannon was created precisely to stop the elephant that demolished 2 blocks of what was then not such a large Moscow. The Dagestanis entered into a military alliance with the Muscovites. They just didn't know back then that Russians always break treaties. In 1605, a huge Muscovite army invaded Dagestan, but 20 kilometers from Makhachkala, it was surrounded and utterly defeated. That's how 50,000 of the first good Russians appeared in the Caucasus. After that, for 112 years, the Russians tried to conquer Dagestan. And for 112 years, like a Matryoshka doll, they rolled down from the mountains back into the forest. It's a sad tune to play on the guzli. And only in 1722 did the famous window cutter and beard chopper Peter I manage to grab a piece of land and build a fortress there. Dagestan was finally occupied at the beginning of the 19th century. From that moment, dark times began for the Highlanders. The Russians immediately started clearing out the local population and replacing them with bast-shoot Ivans.
All male citizens report to the military commissariat. Immediately, bring your military ID with you. Are you idiots or what?
Naturally, the Dagestanis were not about to silently endure this. After all, they're not Russians. And with the enthusiasm of Lobachevsky, they began to multiply the invaders by zero. The Caucasian War lasted for 100 years. For 100 years, the Highlanders resisted the giant empire. The most prominent and well-known leader of the resistance was Imam Shamil. He led the Highlanders' struggle for 25 years. And only after his capture in 1859 was Russia able to establish direct control over Dagestan.
The policy of the Kremlin, the policy of Moscow, of Russia, has always been conducted in such a way that only representatives of the Russian people could be heroes, but not, say, Ukrainians. Under no circumstances should Ukrainians have national heroes. The same goes for Dagestan. There should be no national hero. Can you imagine? A man who burned our villages, Yermolov, yes, during the Caucasian War, this man has a monument in every city of Dagestan.
Once they had fully established their power, the Muscovites turned to their favorite activity, genocide. Forced Russification and cultural expansion sparked a new wave of resistance. In 1913-1914, an uprising broke out against the Russian language.
They are occupiers, and we live on occupied lands. They don't need us. They only need the territories. Remember this rule. Your elite nation thinks only this way. Their government thinks only this way. They want territories, and the ethnic groups don't matter at all.
After the first collapse of the pseudo-empire in 1917, Dagestan finally regained its independence. The Mountain Republic was established, and it lasted for 3 years. It's symbolic that the flag of the Republic closely resembles the flag of the United States, which was also adopted after gaining independence.
We are constantly at war with Russia. In fact, this war has basically never stopped for us. Naturally, we will do all we can to make sure Russia loses this war. We Dagestanis, in general, my people are placing all their hopes today on Ukraine's victory in this war, because we share a common enemy.
Things did not get any better with the arrival of the Bolsheviks. The Red occupiers immediately began forcing the Free Highlanders into collective farms. This was met with fierce resistance from the Muslim clergy, because cultivating land confiscated by the state goes against Sharia law. This shows a complete lack of understanding of local customs by the Muscovites. In 500 years, they never learned the local ways simply because they never intended to. Only colonizers behave this way. The Dagestanis also decided to ignore Soviet traditions and began establishing Sharia courts, which sentenced party officials to be reincarnated as good party officials.
Do you perhaps know what the best option is? A knife. This state isn't Dagestan, right?
As we can see, the Dagestani people have been continuously resisting Russian aggression for 5 centuries, while Russia has been trying to destroy the mountain people for 5 centuries. And even now, Dagestan remains unsettled.
Even today, I write to young Dagestanis, to athletes I know on social media, and they say, nothing has changed. You won't get a job if your registration isn't from here. They say, you're not local. With a surname like that, with no one wants to get involved with you. It's still just as hard to rent an apartment because they're only for Slavs.
And the unrest resumed precisely with the rise to power of the dwarf Führer. In 1999, after the spectacle called the Ryazan sugar incident, the war spread from Chechnya to Dagestan as well.
For several days, Tandon was bombed continuously. They tried to seize the sluice and bombed it again. In fact, the war in the Botlik district of Dagestan ended with the militants leaving, although they suffered heavy losses. What remained were devastated villages. As it turned out later, these ruins were the prologue to a new, larger war.
The Dagestanis, led by Kibedov, began fighting against the Russian troops.
In his sermons, Bagodin Magomedov often spoke in detail about the absolute necessity of jihad against the infidels, emphasizing the inevitability of Dagestan eventually becoming an independent state.
Russia came to Dagestan with only one goal to plunder. At first, the Muscovites were lured by access to the Caspian Sea and the desire to control vast trade routes. In reality, it was a racketeering raid.
From today on, each and every one of you is truly, most certainly doomed.
Later, large oil reserves were discovered in Dagestan, and Moscow clung to the mountainous land like a tick. Or more precisely, Like a two-headed tick, the potential oil reserves in Dagestan are estimated at 280 million tons, which is comparable to the reserves of Syria and the Republic of Congo. According to forecasts, the waters of the Dagestani Caspian Shelf contain 450 to 500 million tons of black gold. And that's not even mentioning the billions of cubic meters of gas.
Dagestan has so much oil and gas that, believe me, if you put together Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, honestly, Dagestan would be much better with reserves that are far, far greater.
If you look at Dagestan now, you wouldn't immediately guess that oil is being extracted in this country. Dagestan is a land of poverty and destitution. The occupiers leave nothing for the locals, and the scraps that fall from Kremlin pockets are picked over by local collaborators.
The Karayev family is cramped in a small shed on the outskirts of Makhachkala, but even this shack doesn't belong to them. Katun and her husband are disabled and unable to earn enough for a home of their own, and ahead lies a long, cold winter that these elderly people may not survive.
All oil and gas extraction belongs to Putin's pocket companies. In fact, both legally and practically, Putin is personally robbing the people of Dagestan.
Russia is a country that, in the view of many, is believed to be directly governed by God.
In 20 years, under the rule of the Pale Moth, Dagestan has become one of the most depressed regions in Russia. In this oil-producing republic, wages are among the lowest in the country. The infrastructure is downright apocalyptic. 68% of Dagestanis live without sewage systems and have to use outdoor toilets with the view of the beautiful mountains. In the 21st century, in 500 years of Russian expansion, Dagestan has gone from being an advanced, flourishing state to a sketch from Nasha Russia.
Look at them, huh? They'll do anything for their own gain, those guys.
But Dagestan cannot remain a part of the Russian Federation for even a second longer, or else there will be nothing left of it.
For us, sliding into this Russian world basically means sliding into extinction.
The entire male population is being forcibly sent to die in Ukraine for the sake of the Russian world. The level of treachery is off the charts. Dagestanis, who have been oppressed by the Russian world for centuries, are being forced to die for this very Russian world.
This is lawlessness on the part of officers and police personnel. They just grab people out of nowhere without warning. These are men who have sold their religion for 40,000 rubles.
Let us remind you once again, Dagestanis are not Russians. There is fierce resistance to this insane disposal going on in the Republic. People are openly speaking out against the war.
No to war! Say no to Ukraine! There will be reckoning!
According to the publication Caucasus, Realities alone, more than 8,000 Dagestanis have died in the so-called Special Military Operation Zone. The real losses are several times higher. For such a small nation, this is a catastrophe. That is why Dagestan is almost the only region in Russia where there is mass resistance to mobilization.
Anywhere. We're not going anywhere. Why exactly are you taking our men? Can you please tell me who was it that ended up being attacked and why? Where? Against Russia?
As it stands, Russia is the one who attacked. Dagestan is essentially the only region in all of Russia where street protests are currently happening right now, unlike in the capital city Moscow, where women often loudly bang pots and pans on the balconies of their apartment buildings. Dagestanis are not afraid to stand up for their rights.
At night, outraged residents of Makhachkala took to the streets to protest on Peter I Avenue. They organized a protest that they had held many times before. They walked continuously across the pedestrian crossing, thereby blocking the road. Residents of Dagestan regularly protest because of power outages.
Armed conflict is still ongoing in Dagestan. Recently, there were reportedly intense street battles in several cities, where, according to reports, a total of 17 police officers were removed from active duty.
Where are they? Ow! Something hit my hand.
Dagestan must be free, truly independent, and prosperous. The people of Dagestan, the Dagestanis, must reclaim their beautiful ancestral homeland and all of its abundant, invaluable natural riches for themselves and future generations. As part of Russia, not only do they have absolutely no chance at a normal, peaceful, and dignified life, but they have no chance at a precious life at all. Now, as Ukraine is bravely and resolutely strangling the beast, the Highlanders finally have a real and historic opportunity, genuine chanceto, throw off the heavy, oppressive, 5-century-old Russian yoke.
Today, I see posts from some Dagestanis on social media where they openly and even proudly voluntarily call themselves Russians. Accordingly, I honestly don't know what's happening to my Dagestan these days. I can't understand at all what our imams, our ancestors, and our forefathers gave their lives for in the long and difficult struggle against Russia. Today, if we Dagestanis call ourselves Russians, what has happened to us? It makes me so sad, so hurt to see and hear all of this.
As long as the Russian pseudo-empire exists, hundreds of peoples remain hostages to this backward malignant entity. But clearly, the Rashists are living out their final days. The regions no longer want to serve Moscow's foolish ambitions. And even less do they want to share collective responsibility for its crimes.
After that, reports of protests against mobilization began pouring in from various republics and cities. Experts believe that these disturbances in Russia are the first step toward major changes.
What do we know about Chechnya? What associations does it evoke for us now? Putin's personal guards, regime hounds, an unhinged ding-dong dictator doing the Kremlin's dirty work, Kadyrovites' war crimes in Ukraine, and protection rackets in Russia. It wasn't always like this. Once, Chechnya was Ichkeria and struck fear into every Russian vatnik, from Kamchatka to Kaliningrad. Back then, a small mountain people challenged a fat, arrogant giant and won.
Yeltsin came out a few minutes later, no handshakes. He takes the seat assigned to him by protocol. Ingushetia also wants to sit at the head of the table, directly opposite, thereby giving the meeting an interstate status. Another pause. There is a commotion around the table. Departing from protocol, the Russian president sits in the middle and invites Ingushetia to take the seat opposite him.
At that time, the Chechen people were associated with bravery, honor, and freedom. We want to remind everyone of this because Ichkeria must once again become a symbol of the collapse of the pseudo-empire.
Probably the only people on earth who believe in nothing at all, who are devoid of spirituality, morality, and are hopelessly and for a long time lagging behind the level of human development. That is the Russians.
For nearly 300 years, the Chechens have consistently defeated the orcs. In 1708, Moscow-appointed governors decided to play at being Saakashvili and his gang, started imposing their own rules, and began discriminating against the local Highlanders. No one was willing to tolerate the arrogance of the drunken newcomers, so the first anti-Russian uprising in Chechnya broke out under the leadership of Murat Kuchakov.
The outskirts of the Russian state were immediately engulfed in the flames of popular uprisings.
The occupiers suppressed the uprising, but the bitter aftertaste remained. It became clear that the Chechens would no longer tolerate Moscow's expansion. That's why the Russians began carrying out punitive raids throughout Chechnya. In 1722, the Caucasus was once again set ablaze. The Chechens refused to swear allegiance to Russia, which had brought exorbitant taxes and corruption to their land.
We rob everyone we need to. Everything will be just the way we like it.
For Russians, being in Chechnya became, to put it mildly, hazardous to their health. That's why Moscow kept sending more and more peasant cannon fodder there. major uprisings in Chechnya broke out every 10 years. And instead of finally starting to respect the locals and their traditions, the Russians treated them with even greater cruelty. As a result, in 1785, the entire North Caucasus united against the Muscovites. The struggle was led by Sheikh Mansour. You've definitely heard of him. A Chechen battalion, which is now fighting the orcs as part of the Ukrainian Defense Forces, is named after him. Even Putin's pet skunk Kadyrov named his new battalion in honor of Mansour.
Everything is moving in big steps toward the Third Chechen War. If anyone isn't aware, well, I guess I'm breaking the news here, because apparently no one wants to live peacefully and in harmony.
So you see what kind of authority and respect this national hero of Ichkeria commands, that even the enemies of a free Chechnya revere him. And that just turns the Z Patriots inside out. Here's a short quote from an outraged rashist. The most surreal thing is that in Ukraine there's a battalion with the same name, and it's fighting against Russians, since Sheikh Mansour was a staunch Russophobe. So the presence of such a battalion in Ukraine is quite justified. But why the hell do we also have a paramilitary unit named after this bastard? That's a big question for me. Maybe then we should form a Vlasov battalion in Moscow? Why not? The Russian Federation still uses Vlasov's banner as its national flag. And Vlasov's and Russian fascism's ideologue, Ilyin, is Putin's favorite writer.
Ivan Ilyin, the well-known Russian thinker Ivan Ilyin, the renowned philosopher Ivan Ilyin, the great Russian philosopher Ivan Ilyin. As the philosopher Ivan Ilyin said,
fascism was right, because it was based on a healthy national patriotic feeling, without which no people can either affirm their existence or create their own culture.
Russians have hatred and fear of Sheikh Mansour ingrained at the genetic level. And there are reasons for this. Mansour gathered thousands of Highlanders around him and declared a holy war against the colonizers. The first punitive squad of orcs was utterly shredded into sauerkraut. According to one version, the future hero of the war against Napoleon, General Bagration, was captured at that time.
It's simply impossible to live with him.
Why?
He imagines himself to be Napoleon. Contentment is a kind of food that is quickly consumed.
Bagration was an ethnic Caucasian. Perhaps that is what saved him from a just transformation into a good Russian. Although he was even worse than the Russians because he came to destroy his own people. A kind of 18th century Kadyrov, the Tsar's personal foot soldier.
Ramzan Kachanovich, could you tell us, how did the official opening of the clinic go?
First of all, congratulations on the support at home.
Unfortunately, the small army of the mountaineers simply could not physically resist the military machine of the Russian Empire. Well, how's the car? More like a minibus packed with slaves, whom the Tsar's officers endlessly drove into bloody assaults. Even back then, some Emelia from Ryazan should have wondered, what the hell am I dying for somewhere far away in the mountains, when at this very moment my wife is being traded for a spaniel? But Russians still don't think about this.
Who are you seeing off exactly?
I'm seeing off 2 sons from Chelny.
How are you feeling about it? Right now?
Positive. I'm waiting. Bye. Today, both of my sons at once. You interested?
In any national liberation war, there are always heroes, but there are also executioners. If you go to the North Caucasus now, you can see monuments to General Yermolov. And it might give the impression that Yermolov is the main hero of the Caucasus. This is the essence of the deceit of the Russian occupiers. Yermolov is the one who led the genocide of the peoples of the Caucasus. He is the author of the phrase, "choose submission or terrible extermination." The Highlanders made their choice and told Yermolov to shove his submission where Russian car manufacturers get their hands from. Even Hitler would have envied Yermolov. This was an attempt at a final solution to the Chechen question. Chechens began to be forcibly removed from their land, and Russians were brought in to take their place. Doesn't that remind you of anything? Right now, on all the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, Russians are being brought in en masse and settled in the homes of Ukrainians.
There are plenty of people who left the occupied territory and whose homes were seized in the very first months of occupation, along with other property, all of which was taken over by the occupiers. Today, according to very rough statistics, the local population of Berdyansk and the Berdyansk district is actually in the minority compared to the incoming occupiers.
And Ukrainians are either being driven out or killed.
Now, regarding the so-called sleepers, we evicted a large number of families. It was very difficult to do. We evicted those who, in one way or another, did not support the special military operation. Those who insulted the flag, Russian anthem, or president of...
Entire Chechen villages were escorted out under guard to mountainous Chechnya. The Chechens were left with either dying of hunger in the mountains or fighting the occupiers with weapons in their hands.
The whole world was completely deceived by Russia. There can be no negotiations with Russia. Ukraine's victory is inevitable, and the subsequent liberation of the Caucasus is also inevitable.
For Russians, February 23rd is Soviet Army Day, a day when even the most down-and-out drunk is equated with a defender of the fatherland. He is to be congratulated and given socks along with a small bottle of vodka. But for the Chechen people, this is a day of mourning, a day of national tragedy. After all, it was on this very day that Stalin, the executioner of nations, came up with a new amusement for himself and decided to deport an entire people. The so-called Operation Lentil, during which between 500,000 and 650,000 Chechens and Ingush were deported. During this false deportation, about 100,000 Chechens and more than 20,000 Ingush died. This is the genocide of the Chechen people. Yet another genocide carried out by the Soviet authorities after the Holodomor.
Starting from February 24th, 1944, early in the morning at dawn, 5 soldiers would come to each house and take away all the men from the age of 14. Everyone?
When the Red Empire collapsed and the great Russians switched to eating Bush's chicken legs, the Chechens found hope for freedom. And its name was Jokar Dudayev. In 1991, Ichkeria declared its independence. But because the region was rich in oil, the remnant of the former empire, Russia, went to war against the Chechens. Everyone knows the results of the peace and order imposed by the federal troops. The destroyed city of Grozny, burned out villages, and tens of thousands of civilians, women and children killed.
It's hard to believe we'll have to destroy homes. The main thing is not to hit our own people.
But the occupiers paid dearly for this. Ichkeria won the war, and Russia was forced to sign the shameful Kasavyurt Accord. Moscow effectively recognized Ichkeria's independence and withdrew its troops from its territory.
We decided, I believe, wisely. We are ending the war. We will withdraw the troops from here.
But we all know that Russia always breaks every agreement. That's something to keep in mind for those now shouting about a truce with them.
Still, I believe we need to be much smarter, because right now we are not evacuating. Well, let's be honest. If we don't evacuate, a lot of people will suffer, and many people will die, because we are not evacuating. We need to be more cunning in this whole game, because it is a game. We need to play by the rules.
The Russians killed Dudayev, forces gathered, and a few years later they invaded Ichkeria again. The Second Chechen War was started for one single purpose: to boost the political rating of the new dictator of the failed empire, Putin. And this time, the Russian army was many times more brutal. As a result of the betrayal by the Kadyrov clan, Chechnya was occupied again, and the Kadyrov organized crime group was given free rein to plunder it. Even though Kadyrov himself once declared jihad against the Russians.
Is it true that you once said that every Chechen must kill 150 Russians to get into paradise?
No, what I said back in 95 or 96 was that I urged Chechens to kill as many as they could. I didn't say 100, 150, or 200. I said as many as you can. At that time, I was calling for jihad.
The Russians have neither principles nor honor. They reward traitors and forget about their own fallen soldiers. Now, Chechnya is currently ruled by a deranged, cartoonish, and unpredictable sultan whose only goal is to keep astonishing everyone with his stupidity and cruelty.
Gift. Something. Those must be diamonds, right?
Well, that's what they say. I would know. I'm just a guy from Kaysen. How would I know, right?
Kadyrov has literally turned Chechnya's budget into his own personal wallet. Despite the fact that Chechnya is rich in oil, it remains a subsidized region with a poor population. Even though Moscow allocates $3 billion to the Republic every year, everyone knows perfectly well where those billions go.
Where's the money from Ramzan? You said Allah gives it for Chechnya.
Allah gives from Allah.
Asked where the money comes from, you say from Allah.
From Allah.
If in 2020 Ramzan declared 381 million rubles, then in 2021 it was only 26 million. And that's while holding the same position. Apparently for Kadyrov, whether it's 381 million or 26, it doesn't make a difference. Either way, it's pocket change. A tiny sum that he writes down on paper just for show-off, of course. He even knows how to write.
I remained inexperienced, but my youth is gone. It just slipped away somewhere. Yeah, I don't know, Don. That's it. That's how things are now.
In 2018, Ramzan actually officially earned less than his underage son.
I am glad to welcome the Vladimir Putin Russian University is of great importance to the country. The best fighters from all regions of the country are trained.
At this time, the Chechen people are on the brink of survival. Chechnya has the lowest wages in Russia. A third of the population lives below the poverty line, sitting on oil and receiving billions in subsidies. The luxury of the Kadyrov clan against the backdrop of widespread poverty is simply staggering. The level of social injustice is off the charts. The Kadyrovites are like parasites, sucking the last lifeblood out of the Chechen people. Yes, 2 Russians. Yes, flowers. Yes, probably. Yes, yes, yes. Hello. Started from here. She. Come here. Stops. Cancel, Ewell. Yes, I can't. Take it out. Yes, she, I. But there are reasons to believe that this won't last long. No matter how much Kadyrov and his inner circle try to show that he's full of energy, everyone understands that Ramzan doesn't have much time left to poison the Caucasian air with his presence. There's already behind-the-scenes infighting for the position of chief traitor of Chechnya. The occupiers' regime is more unstable than ever.
The Kremlin will not allow a transfer of power. They supposedly have their own candidate, and that is Abti Alaudinov.
And we Muslims are probably waiting for the coming of Jesus more than anyone else.
The war for the independence of the Chechen people has never stopped. Now it is being fought on the battlefields of Ukraine. Many Chechen units are fighting side by side with Ukrainian defenders against the Russian occupiers. The most well-known among them are the Sheikh Mansour Battalion, the Johar Dudayev Battalion, and the Kamzat Gelayev Battalion. I did it on purpose, and Volodya will be the Shahid.
To bravely resist the ongoing Russian occupation in Ukraine's determined struggle for its freedom, sovereignty, and independence.
A shot for Ukraine! Allahu Akbar!
In other words, the enemies of the Chechens who are now fighting as part of the armed forces of Ukraine and volunteer battalions are the Kadyrovites, who are simply their direct enemies. It's not about the Russian Federation or the colonizer, no, it's just a collaborator. These are enemies they want to destroy.
The result of this centuries-long struggle will ultimately be only one. Ichkeria will undoubtedly be free, and Russia will fall apart. Russia is falling apart because of criminal and ethnic conflicts. It is no longer a unified state, and in fact, not even a state at all. Because the state lives by laws, but Russia lives by inertia.
This would be the most correct thing for him, and I can't even say the word potent. I keep tripping over it. It's just so hard to get it out.
Kadyrov and Putin continue to carve up the wild berries marketplace. Putin's avatar in this is billionaire and Dagestani Senator Suleiman Kerimov.
In this conflict, Putin also has a personal interest, and he's on Kerimov's side. Kerimov is one of the wallets for Putin and his family.
Here events unfold just like in the movie Blind Man's Bluff.
And things are really bad for us. Are we going to take the car? No, we'll go on foot.
Dondon put on his wedding tracksuit, gathered the Akhmat forces which, in theory, are supposed to be defending the Kursk region right now, and declared that Kerimov and 2 deputies from Dagestan and Ingushetia paid a killer $100 million to assassinate Kadyrov.
There are witnesses, there are people they try to hire, yes sir, for how much you can imagine, right? He was contracted through the NDV administration. He was contracted in Norky Vog.
The head of the region is currently announcing a blood feud against senators and deputies, live and officially on air.
Wait, you can really actually do that?
Even on Pirate Tortuga, there was more order than this. The wild 90s were child's play compared to this, because back then it was gangs fighting, but now entire regions and republics are waging war over business. After the radio announcement about the blood feud, assailants shot at a car with English police near the capital of Ingushetia, killing 3 people. The response: I declare, whoever is involved in this blood feud, if it is proven, then Karim Suleiman and his family must answer for this sacrifice, came very quickly. A gas station in Grozny did not explode. There were casualties there as well. Naturally, that gas station belonged to the Kadyrov family. As they say, it has begun. The Caucasus is on fire, and the stench of carbon monoxide is spreading across all of Russia. And the scariest part is that because of a squabble among a handful of gangsters, the people of the Caucasus are now in great danger. The region that could suffer the most is Russia's smallest Ingushetia. This republic and its people are among the most discriminated against in the so-called empire. A drunken bear in a Kosovarodka shirt showed up in Ingushetia in 1772, and dark times began for the Ingush. In 1917, there was a chance to kick the decaying empire and set off on their own path. The Ingush, as part of the Mountain Republic, declared their sovereignty. The author of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the Mountain Republic was the Ingush Vasangare Javagiev. The Ukrainian People's Republic was one of the first to recognize the new state, along with Great Britain and Germany.
In light of these recent and significant events, I firmly believe that it is now extremely important and necessary to return to the project, the ambitious and visionary project of the Mountain Republic, which, at one time in history, was officially recognized by dozens of countries in the international community.
The peoples of the North Caucasus Chechens, Ingush, Dagestaners stood together against Moscow's colonization. Naturally, the Kremlin became disheartened and decided to act as deceitfully as possible, following the principle of divide and conquer. Moscow did everything it could to sow discord among peoples who were truly close to one another.
A resident of the Russian region of Ingushetia, Ahmed Khan Timurziev personally asked the head of Chechnya to return the remains of his sons, Hassan and Hussein, so that they could be properly buried. In December 2020, they were killed by security forces in Grozny during an attack on police officers.
After the end of the Civil War, the communists redrew the borders of the Caucasian republics in such a way that they planted a time bomb set to go off 100 years later. And the deportation of the entire Ingush people in 1944 started the countdown. Most of Ingushetia was incorporated into the North Ossetian Soviet Republic. The mountainous part of the Prigorodny district was given to Georgia. The homes of the deported were given to Ossetian families. Ingushetia was divided up like an Ossetian pie. After the collapse of the Red concentration camp, the Ingush began returning home en masse and started demanding the return of their houses and land, which Ossetians had already been living in for 60 years. Caucasians are hot-blooded people, so they immediately pulled out knives and daggers. In 1992, there was an ethnic conflict that few people remember. In a short period, more than 400 Ingush were killed. The Kremlin took the side of North Ossetia. Like, why did you come back anyway? We kicked you out, didn't we? Ingushetia lost a quarter of its historical territories.
I took part in it, and I have to say so did my colleagues, including those who were working there. They were also fulfilling their duty. They separated the opposing sides' eyes. For example, my group and I worked both in the gorges and across the territories, freeing, among others, hostages of Ingush nationality.
And in 2001, in the Caucasus, a clan of ghouls and traitors came to power, known as the Kadyrovs. Though, they are better known as the Sultan's collaborators.
Is it true that you once said that every Chechen must kill 150 Russians to really get into paradise?
No, what I said was, back in 95 or 96, I called on Chechens to kill as many as you can. I didn't say 100, 150 or 200, I said as many as you can. At that time, I was calling for jihad.
The Kadyrov clan has recently demanded that Ingushetia be returned to Chechnya, making the case that, in their opinion, it used to be a single republic. The Ingush asked a reasonable question, so maybe Chechnya should join Ingushetia instead.
Ramzan Kadyrov threatened to use force to take land from neighboring Ingushetia. This is how the head of Chechnya responded to the Ingush protest that took place on November 12 in the Sunzhensky district.
The plan for complete annexation failed. So Kadyrov's people began tearing Ingushetia apart piece by piece. Loshua for a gift. I am now addressing all of you, the provocateurs. I took your land because I do not consider you to be people, or even men, and I will, without hesitation, take the other remaining villages as well. Make no mistake, this is my intention. In 2013, Kadyrov, in a sauna with the leader of Ingushetia, Yevkurov, signed a backroom deal, transferring the Sunzhensky district of the Republic to Chechnya. It just so happened that this particular district is considered the richest in oil reserves. Naturally, the residents of Ingushetia were surprised by the new territorial realities and told the Don to go twist donkey tails and make medals for his son. On August 1, 2014, a fight broke out with gunfire on the border between Ingushetia and Chechnya, involving Ingush and Chechen security forces. People were constantly coming out to protest. Even the Constitutional Court of Ingushetia took the side of the protesters. The Kadyrovites had to retreat for a while. But on November 8, 2018, the situation heated up again. The Chechen parliament published a new map of the republic, which included lands belonging to Ingushetia. This time, the Constitutional Court of the Russian Federation sided with Kadyrov and recognized the annexation as legal.
Ingushetia did not officially transfer any territory to Chechnya. The Constitutional Court based its decision on the fact that there was never a clearly defined administrative border between the republics, and therefore a referendum was ultimately not considered necessary.
At that time, Kadyrov was still considered Putin's foot soldier, and he was allowed to do anything. So the foot soldier got spoiled and wanted a general's horse. A war over an online store can easily escalate into a war for territory and power across the entire former Russia. If there are no laws, then the law of the jungle automatically takes over. In this case, swamps.
Even now, at this very moment, I say,
no matter what you're asked, where the money comes from, you say, from Allah.
Whether it wants to or not, Ingushetia is already drawn into the conflict. And there are no guarantees that a blood feud against one Ingush deputy won't spill over to the entire Ingush people. Especially since the cocaine Padishah harbors resentment and anger toward the Ingush.
The leadership, yes, of the state, yes, so that they make the right decision. Everything that came before has been annulled. Annul this decision as well.
The Ingush need to act boldly and in an organized manner. They must once again become that powerful, influential, and significant ideological force which once united the diverse peoples of the Caucasus in the struggle against local tyrants and Moscow occupiers.
We have decided, and I believe very wisely, thoughtfully, that we are are indeed bringing a responsible and necessary end to the war, that we will withdraw all of the troops from here.
Recently, fighters of the Ingush Liberation Armies, such a group recorded a video message on the territory of Ingushetia, in which they called on the peoples of the Caucasus to resume the armed struggle for liberation against Russia. They stole the squadron. In the city, Oksana Marshal Deshevo, Hodegneshtami Deshevo, Horosho Deshevo, Shok, Hol, Deshoan, and I am observing this for whom? The recent events in the Caucasus and the disputes around wild berries have once again shown that the collapse of the pseudo-empire has already happened. Now, we are witnessing its agony. We are eagerly awaiting the final showdown between two fools driven mad by impunity. The last Sultan versus the last Emperor. The Moli clan against the Baran clan.
It's quite a challenging situation, and I'm very interested to hear your opinion about this. If you don't mind sharing.
And the Ingush people, as well as all the peoples of the Caucasus, without hesitation, need to take full advantage of this great and significant historical opportunity and become truly free.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.